The wealthy are not more disciplined than you. That statement will feel wrong. It will conflict with almost everything the financial self-improvement industry has told you about the relationship between wealth and personal discipline. It will contradict the narratives that wealthy people themselves often tell about their own success. And it is, by the evidence, substantially true in ways that reframe the entire conversation about what actually separates financial outcomes at different levels. The wealthy do not possess more discipline. They have built environments in which less discipline is required. They have structured their financial lives so that the behaviors producing wealth are the default, the automatic, the path of least resistance rather than the effortful. Willpower dependent, decision requiring alternative to a different default. The discipline gap between wealthy and average is not a gap in character. It is a gap in architecture. And architecture can be built by anyone who understands what they are building. That distinction between discipline as a character trait and discipline as an environmental design is the insight that changes everything. And most financial content never makes it explicitly, because it is harder to sell than the version where the difference between you and a wealthy person is something they have that you need to develop. The real difference is something they built. And building is available to everyone. He grew up in the same neighborhood, attended the same schools, started with roughly the same financial foundation as 3 of his closest friends. 2 decades later, the financial gap between them is large enough that people who meet them now would not guess they came from the same starting point. The gap is not explained by income differences that are proportional to the outcome differences. It is not explained by intelligence. It is not explained by any single decision that can be identified as the turning point. It is explained by a series of environmental differences so small, so mundane, so undramatic in their individual expression that none of them would have made a compelling story at the time they were established. Collectively, they produced a compounding divergence that 20 years of arithmetic made impossible to ignore. Go to the comments and write environment if you believe that your physical and social surroundings have influenced your financial behavior more than your conscious intentions have. Because most people, when they reflect honestly, discover that the environment won more often than the intention did. And that discovery is not a reason for resignation. It is the most actionable insight in personal finance. Here is the first environmental difference. And this one is structural rather than behavioral. His savings transfer happened on the day his income arrived, not after he had assessed the month's expenses and saved what remained. Before the savings were removed from the accessible account before the month began, before any competing claim on the same capital had formed, before the psychological reality of the money as available had been established. The saving was not a decision he made each month. It was a condition of the architecture. The money was gone before the month could find a use for it. His friends saved differently. They intended to save. They planned to save. At the end of months when the intentions held, they saved something. At the end of months when the expenses were higher than anticipated, or the opportunity was compelling, or the mood on a Thursday evening made the restaurant feel necessary, they saved less or nothing. The intention was identical across all of them at the beginning of every month. The architecture was not. And architecture, not intention, determines what actually happens at the end of 20 years of months. This is the behavioral principle called pre-commitment, the deliberate act of making a future decision in a high-quality cognitive state and then building a structure that executes the decision automatically, removing the future self from the moment of execution entirely. The power of pre-commitment is not that it makes you more disciplined. It is that it makes the question of your discipline irrelevant at the moment it would otherwise matter most. The savings happen because the structure executes, not because willpower showed up. The second environmental difference was social, and this one is discussed less than pre-commitment, but is, by the research, equally consequential. The reference group, the social circle, whose financial behaviors, norms, and conversations constitute the ambient environment of a person's financial life, is one of the most powerful determinants of individual financial behavior that exists. Not because people consciously imitate their social circle, because the social circle defines what feels normal, what feels like enough, what feels like the appropriate level of spending, saving, consumption, and ambition for a person in this particular group. His reference group normalized investment conversations, not as exceptional behavior for exceptional people, as the ordinary thing that people in his circle did with money they were not spending. The question was not whether to invest, but what the current allocation looked like and whether it reflected current thinking. That conversation was so ordinary, so consistently present in his social environment, that not participating in it would have felt like the aberration rather than the reverse. His friends' reference groups normalized consumption, not irresponsibly. Ordinarily, the conversation was about experiences, about purchases, about the things money was being spent on rather than the things it was being deployed toward. Neither group was making a conscious financial choice. Both were inhabiting a social environment whose norms made specific financial behaviors feel obvious and other financial behaviors feel unusual. The discipline required to invest when your social environment treats investment as normal is close to zero. The discipline required to invest when your social environment treats consumption as normal is significant, ongoing, and frequently insufficient. The gap is not in the people, it is in the environments they are inside. Comment reference group if you have ever noticed your financial behavior shifting in the direction of the people around you without consciously deciding to shift it. Because that observation, made honestly, is the most actionable intelligence available for understanding why your current financial trajectory looks the way it does. The third environmental difference is attentional. And this one operates so quietly that most people never identify it as a variable at all. The wealthy person's relationship with their financial information is regular, structured, and emotionally neutral in a way that the average person's is not. Not because wealthy people are more comfortable with financial information, because they have built a relationship with it that removes the emotional charge that makes financial information something most people prefer to avoid examining closely. He reviewed his financial position on a fixed schedule, not when something prompted concern, not when a year-end statement arrived. On a schedule he had established and maintained regardless of what the numbers were doing. The regularity removed the emotional loading from the review. When the review is an ordinary, scheduled, emotionally neutral event, the information it contains, whether positive or negative, is processed as information rather than as threat or relief. The response is analytical rather than emotional. The decisions that follow are proportionate rather than reactive. The average person's relationship with financial information is event-driven. They check when something prompts them to check. The prompts are typically either positive surprises or negative concerns. Both of these contexts load the information with emotional charge that compromises the quality of the response. The person who checks their investments during a market decline is making decisions in a loss aversion context. The person who checks after a strong quarter is making decisions in an overconfidence context. Neither context produces the quality of analytical thinking that a fixed, emotionally neutral, regular review provides as its ordinary output. The discipline gap here is not in willpower. It is in the scheduling. The person who reviews on a fixed schedule, regardless of conditions, has removed the emotional context from the information processing. The person who reviews reactively has ensured that the emotional context is always present. The structure produces different decision quality regardless of the character of the person inside it. Here is the fourth environmental difference, and it is the one that compounds most powerfully across time. His financial decisions had a written decision-making framework, not a complex one. A set of explicit, pre-established criteria that a financial decision had to meet before capital moved. The criteria were not sophisticated by institutional standards. They were consistent. And consistency, applied across thousands of small financial decisions over 2 decades, produces a cumulative quality of outcome that no single brilliant decision can replicate. The average person makes financial decisions without explicit criteria. Each decision is evaluated freshly, in the context of the moment, against whatever standards feel relevant at the time. The standards shift with mood, with social context, with the specific framing of the opportunity. The decisions are not necessarily worse in any single instance. They are inconsistent in a way that produces inconsistent outcomes. And inconsistent outcomes, accumulated across 20 years, produce the financial position that looks, from the outside, like the result of character differences that were actually structural ones. This is the discipline gap, not a gap in willpower, a gap in the architecture that makes willpower irrelevant. The wealthy person's financial environment is designed to produce wealth-building behavior as its default output. The average person's financial environment is designed, by absence of deliberate design, to produce whatever behavior the moment suggests. Designing the environment is not hard. It requires one serious conversation with yourself about what behaviors you want to be automatic. One session of automation set up for the savings and investment contributions. One decision about the reference group you want to normalize the financial conversations you need to be having. One framework, however simple, that your financial decisions must pass before capital moves. None of this requires discipline in the willpower sense. All of it requires discipline in the architectural sense. The discipline to build the environment once, correctly, so that the environment produces the behaviors that the willpower-dependent version of you could never sustain reliably enough to matter. The gap between wealthy and average is a design gap, and design is the one thing that anyone can change at any time without waiting to become a different kind of person first. So here is the question worth sitting with. In your financial life right now, which behaviors are you relying on willpower to sustain that could be made automatic? And what is the cost, in 20 years of compounding, of the difference between those two approaches? Go to the comments and write the first behavior that came to mind, because that behavior is almost certainly the highest leverage place to start. And starting is the entire distance between the financial life you intend and the one you are actually building. vidIQ Sonnet 4.6 Low Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.